Okay, this is about the point in my workflow where I start color correcting. So in this video, we're going to talk about color correcting 101 and how I correct my clips to match one another. Now, first things first, I like to edit with my screen brightness down pretty low so that it's easy on my eyes. But when I'm color correcting, I bring this up to about 2 or 3 notches below the highest setting. I found that if I color correct with my brightness all the way up, I tend to make things a little bit too dim because my screen's too bright. And if I color correct with my screen too dim, then I overcompensate and make my images too bright. So this is about the area that I found where the clips turn out the right exposure without being too dark or bright. All right, so let's jump into our first clip and show you my basic color correcting process. And Final Cut Pro 10.4 came out with its own coloring suite that is much better than what they've had before, so we'll show you how I utilize some of the tools available. So first, you're going to come up here to your control panel and click on this little triangle, your color inspector, and then if you toggle down no corrections, you're going to see a few different options for color correcting. Now I like to start out with color wheels, and within color wheels you'll see this circular wheel thing here. The left side controls your saturation, the right side controls your exposure, and in the middle here you can manipulate the color in any direction. Now I personally like my images very saturated, so I'm going to go ahead and boost this up a tad. My exposure is looking pretty good for the most part, so we'll leave that there. Next tool that I play with is my temperature and tint. Your temperature controls how cool or warm your image is, and as is pretty good, but I'll probably want to warm that up just a tad. And then your tint controls the green or magenta cast on the image. And once again, I think that's already in a good spot, so we'll just leave it at 0. Then you can toggle that effect on and off to see what changes you made to make sure you like them. So moving on from color wheels, I'll next go into color curves. And this right here is called an RGB curve. RGB meaning red, green, and blue. I don't normally play with the colored ones. I just do the master luma curve here. And this is where you control your brightness and your contrast. So anything on the left side of your curve is going to be playing with your shadows, and anything on the right side is going to be playing with your highlights. Now, a very typical use of the RGB curve is to make what's called an S curve, which is to bring your shadows down a little bit and to bring your highlights up, and that creates an S, thus why it's called an S curve. And you see the before and after. What that does is it just makes your image a little bit punchier. Now in this case, I think it's a little bit too dark, so we're going to raise up my shadows a little bit, and we'll bring my highlights up maybe about right there. I don't want to go too far because I'm already kind of clipping the highlights in the mountains here because of the split exposure. Now we could customize this curve even more by making more points in here and adjusting in between our highlights and shadows to play more with the midtones. Let's bring that up just a tad here. And then we can come on this side and play with more of the shadows. Let's say we want to bring that down just a tad. And then our highlights, let's say we want to bring back some of that sky a little bit there. Now if you go too far, it starts to look super fake, so you don't want to get too extreme with these. So there you have your RGB curve, the before and after there. Just made our image a little bit punchier, more contrasty. Now you have some other tools in here like color board and hue and saturation curves. The color board tool is kind of limited, so I don't really use this. And the hue and saturation curves just dives more in depth into customizing every individual color. And these little eyedroppers here allow you to select a specific color. So let's say the blues in the lake here, and then maybe the greens in the trees. And then this allows you to adjust very specific colors one way or another. So we could make that lake a little bit more blue or purple, or turn it into a more teal and orange type look. And with the greens in the trees, we could make those more green or more orange. And you can see the before and after there. We've just slightly altered those colors a little bit. So that's what hue versus hue does. And then hue versus saturation allows you to then saturate those colors more or less. So there's the before and after. And then your luma allows you to bring down that exposure and those blue highlights a little bit up there. But we'll bring that down just a tad to bring back some of our sky. So we'll see the before and after there. You see how we brought back some of the detail back in our sky and mountains. And then your luma versus saturation tool here. We'll bring that up just a tad. So a lot of ability to customize here. And you can even take out very specific colors. So let's say we want to get rid of orange. Or if we want to take blues and bring those up or down. So a lot of ability to customize with the hue and saturation curves. Now let's come up here and we can toggle on and off our effect to see what we've done. Now we have 4 different effects we've applied to our color correction, and you can't toggle all of them on and off from this tab. You have to go back to this film strip, and we can toggle on all of the effects on and off at once, like so. so you can see all the color corrections you've made and the before and after. And the way I can verify to make sure my exposure is right is come up to Window, Workspaces, and go to Color and Effect. Now I don't always use these tools, but when I'm in doubt, I'll pull up these tools, and these help you identify if your color correction is looking right. Now this tool right here is called Scopes, and if I stretch it out here to see it better, what it's reading is the exposure from left to right in my image, and you want it to be above 0 in your shadows and below 100 in your highlights. And so you see in the left side of our image here, we're kind of dark, we're kind of hugging that 0 line, which is over here where you see all these dark shadows. And I'm okay being that close to 0 as long as we're not flatlining against that. So let me show you what I mean. You start to see that dip below 0, and right there it flatlines, and it says there's no more detail once you see that flat line. So as long as we're above 0, I'm okay with that. And then on the other end, we don't want our highlights to be flatlining above 100. So if we bring this up, you see that as those pass 100, we start to blow out these highlights and they lose detail. So again, we're at 100, but we're not going above it, so I'm okay with the overall exposure of my image here. And once I get a color correction that I like, instead of having to redo it all again to the next clip, I'll just push Command C, pick my next clip, Option V, and that allows me to paste the attributes, and I can then decide which attributes I want to copy over, and we're just going to copy over all of these color correction effects. And as you can see, it's too oversaturated, and that tells me maybe this one is a little bit too oversaturated. So we'll bring that saturation down a little bit less dramatic there. And then also come into our next clip, bring that saturation down. Let's toggle that on and off, see how it looks. That's looking a little better. So let's copy that clip and then come into our third clip, Option V to paste attributes. Now that I have a lot of greens, I'm seeing that my current color correction is pushing these a little bit too orange. So we'll come back into our hue saturation curves and bring that hue to hue back down to more green. See how that looks before and after? Looks good. Compare it to my previous clip. Now this clip looks a lot cooler than this clip, but this one was shot at golden hour and this one in the middle of the day with a blue lake, so it is going to look a little bit different, but we might want to warm this one up just a tad to match a little bit better. Alright, so we're looking pretty good so far. Now this clip is a bit different because I'm shooting into the sun, so I get kind of this hazy look. So let's copy and paste our attributes into this clip. And this clip's looking a little bit too blue to me here. So I'm going to come into my color wheels, bring my temperature up, back up to where it was. And if you look over here, you see that we're not even close to 0, which means I need more contrast in this image. It's super flat. We're close on the highlights, but we need to bring this image down a bit. So we'll come into our color wheels here and go to our shadows and say, let's bring just the shadows down a little bit more. A little better, maybe some of the midtones too, and bring those highlights up a tad. And so you see we've brought some contrast back into our image. Now the face looks a little bit dark to me. I want to brighten that up a tad. So if you come into your hue saturation curve and into our luminance, you can pick just the face and bring that up just a tad. Check our before and after. Liking what I see. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next clip. Now let's look at one more example. I wanted to pull up one that was underexposed to show you how I would fix this. Again, start off with our color wheels. We're going to bring up the exposure to start out, bring up our saturation, and this image is looking a little bit cool to me, so we're going to warm him up. And now it's looking a little bit too green, so we're going to bring in some magenta, maybe warm up a little bit more. So let's look at the before and after on that. Looking much better already. But we're going to fix it up even more in color curves. I'm going to want to bring up my shadows here. And we'll bring up our highlights a little bit to give it a little punch. And I'm okay personally blowing out some of the background highlights to expose better for my subject, which is these two right here. Toggle that on and off. Now let's come into my hue saturation curves. And I just want to grab my hue versus luma and bring up just the face here in the shadows, like so. And then bring a little bit more color into the faces there. So now let's go to my effects and toggle that on and off, and you can see the before and after of how I brought all that exposure up, added some color. So there you have it. That is color correcting 101. In the next video, we'll look at color grading, how to customize very specific looks, but that is the basic process of getting your clips to match one another and to have correct exposures, correct white balances, and correct looking colors. That's it. If you have any further questions, please let me know.